Hey everyone! Have you ever been watching the news during an election and just been overwhelmed by all the different flags, symbols, and faces? Well, they all belong to political parties. So today, we're going to dive right into what these parties are, why they're so important for a democracy, and let's be honest, why so many of us have a kind of love-hate relationship with them. So let's jump right in. You've probably heard this before, right? Maybe you've even said it yourself. When things go wrong, it's so common to throw our hands up and ask, where are our leaders? The legendary cartoonist R.K. Laxman just captured this feeling perfectly. But it makes you think, where do these leaders even come from? Well, the answer, most of the time, is political parties. So here's our game plan for today. First, we'll tackle what I call the big complaint. Why parties get so much flack. Then we'll get down to the basics with a simple definition. After that, we'll uncover the 7 big jobs that they do. And then, for some fun, we'll do a thought experiment. What would a world without parties actually look like? And we'll wrap it all up by asking, how many parties is a good number? All right, let's get straight to it. Our first topic, the big complaint. Political parties are everywhere. They're on TV, on billboards, in our news feeds. You just can't miss them. But, and this is a big but, just because they're super visible doesn't mean they're super popular. And this quote, wow, it really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Most people are pretty critical of political parties. There's this huge tendency to blame them for, well, pretty much everything that's wrong with our democracy. They often get painted as the root cause of all the divisions in our society. Okay, so with all this criticism floating around, it's really important to just pause for a second and ask a super basic question. What exactly is a political party? What are we even talking about here? Let's break it down. In the simplest terms, a political party is just a group of people who get together with one main goal, to contest elections and hopefully hold power in the government. They all agree on certain policies and programs that they think are best for everyone. And that leads us to a really key word here, partisan. A partisan is just someone who is super committed to one particular party. This leads to something called partisanship, which is, that tendency to always take one side of an issue. In fact, that's what a party is at its core. It represents a part of society. So every political party, big or small, is pretty much made up of 3 main parts. First, you've got the leaders. These are the big shot decision makers. Then you have the active members. These are the people on the ground doing all the hard work. And finally, you have the followers. That's the rest of us, the ordinary people who believe in the party and show up to vote. Okay, so we've got the definition down, but that brings us to the real heart of the matter. What do these parties actually do? What functions do they perform that make them so essential? Let's take a look at their 7 most important jobs. Okay, first and most obviously, parties contest elections. That's their primary purpose. Second, they present different policies and programs, which gives us voters a real choice. Third, they play a huge role in making the laws for the country. And fourth, pretty simple, the party that wins the election gets to form and run the government. Now, this image is fantastic because it hints at some of their other big jobs. You can just see how parties bring people together. They mobilize them through rallies and movements, and by doing that, they help shape what we call public opinion. So let's look at the other big jobs. Number 5, the parties that lose the election play the super important role of the opposition. They keep the government in check. Sixth, as we just saw, they shape public opinion by raising issues and making noise about them. And the 7th function, this one is a really big deal for everyday people. And this slide right here perfectly shows that 7th function. Parties give people access to government machinery and all those welfare schemes. Let's be real, for an ordinary citizen, it's way easier to go talk to a local party leader than to try and get an appointment with some government officer. This is a huge reason why people often feel a connection to parties, even if they don't fully trust them. All right, we've gone through these 7 essential jobs that parties do. So now, let's try a little thought experiment. Just imagine for a second, a world where political parties just don't exist. What would that even look like? So that's the big question, right? If parties are doing all of this essential stuff, can a modern democracy actually survive without them? Just think about that for a second. Now, take a really close look at this. In a world with parties, you have a government that's accountable to the whole country. But without them, every single candidate would be independent. They'd make promises only for their little local area. No one would be responsible for the big picture, for how the whole country is run. The result? Total chaos. An incredibly uncertain and unstable government. So the big takeaway from our little experiment is this. The rise of political parties is directly, and I mean directly, linked to the rise of representative democracies. You see, as societies got bigger and bigger, we needed representatives. And to organize those representatives and hold them accountable, we needed parties. You can't really have one without the other.
Okay, so we've made the case that parties are necessary, but that brings up the next obvious question. How many should a country have? 1, 2, or a whole bunch? Let's take a quick look at different party systems.
So, take a wild guess. How many political parties do you think are registered with the Election Commission of India? The answer is more than 750. Can you believe that? Now, of course, out of all of those, only a handful are really major players in any election, but still. Now, one type of system you'll find is the one-party system. It's exactly what it sounds like. In these countries, only one party is legally allowed to control and run the whole government. A classic example is China, where only the Communist Party is allowed to rule. It's obviously a very different setup from a multi-party system like we have here in India. So if you remember just one thing from our discussion today, let it be this. Political parties have a ton of flaws and they get a lot of criticism for sure, but they are an absolutely necessary condition for a democracy to actually work. And I'll leave you with one final thought to chew on. We often say that parties just reflect the divisions that already exist in our society. So here's my question to you. If all the political parties disappeared tomorrow, do you think those social divisions would just vanish along with them? It's something to really think about. Thanks for joining me. Hello students, welcome to part 2 of our chapter on political parties. अच्छा एक बात बताओ, इलेक्शंस के टाइम पे जब आप टीवी ऑन करते हो या बाहर पोस्टर्स देखते हो, कभी कंफ्यूज हुए हो कि अरे यार ये कितनी सारी पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज हैं, किसको वोट दें, किसका क्या एजेंडा है? होता है ना? देखो, अगर आप कंफ्यूज होते हैं तो टेंशन मत लो, आप अकेले नहीं हो। ये कंफ्यूजन बिल्कुल नॉर्मल है, बहुत कॉमन है। पर चिंता मत करो, आज हम इंडिया के इस पूरे पार्टी सिस्टम को एकदम सिंपल तरीके से समझेंगे। रेडी? चलो शुरू करते हैं। सोचो आप एक रेस्टोरेंट में गए हो, आपके सामने मेन्यू आता है ना, उसमें अलग अलग ऑप्शंस होते हैं। बिल्कुल वैसे ही दुनिया की अलग अलग कंट्रीज में पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज के भी अलग अलग मेन्यूज होते हैं। लेट्स सी व्हाट दे आर। तो पहला ऑप्शन है वन पार्टी सिस्टम। इसका मतलब साफ है, यहाँ सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक ही पार्टी को गवर्नमेंट चलाने का लीगल राइट होता है। अब आप खुद सोचो, इसे हम एक डेमोक्रेटिक ऑप्शन नहीं मान सकते, क्योंकि यहाँ तो कोई फेयर कॉम्पिटिशन ही नहीं है, राइट? ओके, दूसरा ऑप्शन है टू पार्टी सिस्टम। यहाँ पावर यानी सत्ता यूजुअली दो मेन पार्टीज के बीच में ही घूमती रहती है। हाँ, और भी छोटी मोटी पार्टीज हो सकती हैं, लेकिन जीतने का जो सीरियस चांस होता है वो इन्हीं दो का होता है, जैसे आपने यूएसए और यूके में देखा होगा। और फिर फाइनली आता है मल्टी पार्टी सिस्टम। यहाँ बहुत सारी पार्टीज पावर के लिए कम्पीट करती हैं और 2 से ज़्यादा पार्टीज के पास गवर्नमेंट बनाने का रियल चांस होता है। अक्सर ये अलायंसेज यानी गठबंधन करके गवर्नमेंट बनाते हैं। और हाँ, यही वो सिस्टम है जो हमारे प्यारे देश इंडिया में फॉलो होता है। चलिए अब आते हैं अपने देश पर। इंडिया के मल्टी पार्टी सिस्टम को समझने का सबसे अच्छा तरीका है एक इंडियन थाली के बारे में सोचना। जैसे थाली में इतनी वैरायटी होती है ना, वैसे ही हमारे पॉलिटिक्स में भी है। तो सवाल उठता है कि इंडिया में इतनी सारी पार्टीज हैं क्यों? इसका जवाब एक ही शब्द में है, डाइवर्सिटी। हमारा देश इतना विशाल है, यहाँ इतनी अलग अलग सोशल ग्रुप्स हैं, इतनी ज्योग्राफिकल डाइवर्सिटी है, लोगों के इंटरेस्ट्स और ओपिनियंस भी उतने ही अलग हैं। ये सब सिर्फ 2 या 3 पार्टीज में समा ही नहीं सकते। इट्स जस्ट नॉट पॉसिबल। अच्छा, अब जब इतनी सारी पार्टीज इलेक्शंस लड़ेंगी तो अक्सर क्या होता है कि किसी एक पार्टी को फुल मेजॉरिटी नहीं मिलती। ऐसे में कुछ पार्टीज आपस में हाथ मिलाकर साथ में आकर गवर्नमेंट बनाती हैं। इसी हाथ मिलाने को हम कहते हैं कोएलिशन। आपने जरूर एनडीए या यूपीए जैसे अलायंसेस के नाम सुने होंगे। यही है कोएलिशन गवर्नमेंट। देखो, यही बात आपकी टेक्स्ट बुक में भी लिखी है। ये बिल्कुल कॉमन थॉट है कि इतनी पार्टीज के नाम कैसे याद रखें और ये पॉलिटिशियंस इन कोलिशंस को मैनेज कैसे करते होंगे। वेल, ये सवाल हमें एक बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट पर ले जाता है। अब हम एक ऐसी चीज की बात करेंगे जो आपको थोड़ा सा हैरान कर देगी, एक पैराडॉक्स, एक ऐसी उलझन जो इंडिया में पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज के डेटा को देखकर सामने आती है। बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है, जरा ध्यान से सुनिएगा। तो मेरा आपसे पहला सवाल है, क्या हम लोग यानी साउथ एशिया के लोग पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज पर विश्वास करते हैं, ट्रस्ट करते हैं? सोचो आपका क्या जवाब होगा। फिर मैं आपको डेटा दिखाती हूँ। ओके, डेटा देखिए, ये काफ़ी सरप्राइजिंग है। आधे से भी कम यानी सिर्फ 43% लोग कहते हैं कि उन्हें पार्टीज पर थोड़ा या बहुत ट्रस्ट है।
और एक बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा 37% कहता है कि उन्हें बिल्कुल नहीं या ज्यादा नहीं है। इसका मतलब साफ है कि ट्रस्ट लेवल काफी कम है। तो दिमाग में एक लॉजिकल सवाल आता है ना, कि अगर ट्रस्ट इतना कम है तो क्या इसका मतलब ये है कि लोग पॉलिटिक्स और इन पार्टी से दूर रहते हैं? क्या लोगों का पार्टिसिपेशन भी कम है? चलो पता करते हैं।
एंड सरप्राइज, यहाँ से शुरू होता है हमारा पैराडॉक्स। डेटा आगे ये बताता है कि पिछले कुछ सालों में इंडिया में पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज की मेंबरशिप एक्चुअली घटने की जगह बढ़ी है। आप इस ग्राफ को देखिए, ये ट्रेंड साफ साफ ऊपर जा रहा है।
वेट, देयर इज मोर। सिर्फ मेंबरशिप ही नहीं, जो लोग कहते हैं कि वो किसी ना किसी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के क्लोज फील करते हैं, उनका नंबर भी बढ़ा है। सोचने वाली बात है ना, लोग दूर नहीं जा रहे बल्कि और जुड़ रहे हैं।
और यही है हमारा द ग्रेट इंडियन पैराडॉक्स। इंडिया में पार्टी मेंबरशिप का परसेंटेज ना सिर्फ ग्लोबल एवरेज से ज़्यादा है, बल्कि कनाडा, जापान, स्पेन जैसी कई डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज से भी ऊपर है। सोचो, ट्रस्ट कम पर पार्टिसिपेशन हाई, है ना इंटरेस्टिंग? चलिए, अब आम जनता की बात से थोड़ा आगे बढ़ते हैं और इन मेन प्लेयर्स से मिलते हैं, यानी पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज से। स्पेसिफिकली अब हम बात करेंगे इंडिया की नेशनल पार्टीज की। लेकिन कोई भी पार्टी नेशनल पार्टी बनती कैसे है? इसके लिए इलेक्शन कमीशन ने कुछ रूल्स बनाए हैं। ध्यान से सुनो, एक पार्टी को लोकसभा इलेक्शंस में टोटल वोट्स का कम से कम 6% मिलना चाहिए, या फिर 4 अलग अलग स्टेट्स के असेंबली इलेक्शंस में 6% वोट्स, और इसके साथ साथ लोकसभा में कम से कम 4 सीट्स जीतनी ही पड़ती हैं। तो इस क्राइटेरिया के हिसाब से फिलहाल इंडिया में 6 रिकॉग्नाइज्ड नेशनल पार्टीज हैं। चलिए एक क्विक रैपिड फायर राउंड में इन सबसे मिलते हैं। ओके, टेबल देखते हैं। सबसे पहले इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस या आईएनसी, जिसे कांग्रेस पार्टी भी कहते हैं। ये सेक्युलरिज्म और कमजोर वर्गों के कल्याण की बात करती है। फिर है भारतीय जनता पार्टी या बीजेपी, जिनकी आइडियोलॉजी हिंदुत्व यानी कल्चरल नेशनलिज्म पर बेस्ड है। और तीसरी है बहुजन समाज पार्टी बीएसपी, जिसका मेन फोकस बहुजन समाज यानी दलित्स, आदिवासीज और ओबीसीज को रिप्रेजेंट करना है। इस लिस्ट में आगे हैं कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी ऑफ इंडिया मार्क्सिस्ट यानी सीपीआईएम। ये पार्टी मार्क्सिज्म लेनिनिज्म की विचारधारा को मानती है और सोशलिज्म को सपोर्ट करती है। फिर आती है आम आदमी पार्टी यानी एएपी, जो करप्शन के खिलाफ और साफ सुथरी गुड गवर्नेंस के मुद्दे पर बनी थी। और आखिर में है नेशनल पीपल्स पार्टी यानी एनपीपी, जो नॉर्थ ईस्ट इंडिया से आने वाली पहली नेशनल पार्टी है।
तो हमने दुनिया के पार्टी सिस्टम्स देखे, इंडिया का सिस्टम समझा, पार्टी से मिले, पर इस सब का मतलब क्या है? द बिग क्वेश्चन इज, क्या कोई एक सिस्टम परफेक्ट है?
इसका सबसे सच्चा जवाब ये है कि नहीं। कोई भी सिस्टम हर देश और हर सिचुएशन के लिए आइडियल या परफेक्ट नहीं होता। किसी भी देश का पार्टी सिस्टम उसकी सोसाइटी, उसके इतिहास और उसकी डाइवर्सिटी के हिसाब से धीरे धीरे डेवलप होता है। हमारा मल्टी पार्टी सिस्टम हमारी डाइवर्सिटी का ही एक रिफ्लेक्शन है। और आज के लिए मैं आपको इसे एक फाइनल थॉट के साथ छोड़ रही हूँ। जैसे जैसे इंडिया की सोसाइटी बदल रही है, आगे बढ़ रही है, आपको क्या लगता है, क्या हमारा पार्टी सिस्टम भी उसके साथ साथ बदलेगा? सोचिएगा जरूर। थैंक यू। Hello, everyone. So last time we covered what political parties are and what they do. But today we're getting into the really juicy stuff. We're going to talk about the huge challenges these parties are up against. And you know, what's even more important? We're going to look at how we can actually fix these problems. So, you ready? Let's get right into it. Okay, let me ask you something. Whenever anything goes wrong in the country, anything at all, who's the first person we all point our fingers at? It's the politicians, right? And their parties. It's because they are, well, the most visible face of our democracy. So if we're not happy with how things are going, it's just easy to blame them. And trust me, this isn't just an India thing. It happens all over the world. And this cartoon, it just nails that feeling, doesn't it? Look at this poor voter. He looks so confused. Why? Because all the posters, all the promises, they kind of start to look and sound the same after a while. So to really get to the bottom of this frustration, we've got to dig deeper and look at the real specific challenges these parties are facing. All right, so let's get organized. We're going to break this whole thing down into 4 big challenges. These are the main problems that pretty much every political party in a democracy like ours has to deal with. These are the big 4 we absolutely need to get our heads around. So challenge number 1, and this one, it's a biggie. It's the lack of internal democracy. Kind of ironic, don't you think? I mean, these are the very groups that are supposed to be the champions of democracy for the whole country, but often they're not very democratic inside their own house. So what does that even mean, lack of internal democracy? Well, picture this. All the power, all of it, ends up with just one or maybe a handful of leaders right at the top. They don't really keep track of who their members are, they don't have regular meetings, and forget about holding proper internal elections. So what happens to the average party worker? They're left in the dark. They have basically no say in the big decisions. And here's the real kicker. It becomes all about being loyal to the leader, not to the party's ideas or principles. That's a huge problem. Okay, so when you have that kind of situation where all the power is with a few people, it leads directly to our second challenge. And you've definitely heard of this one. Dynastic succession. You know what I'm talking about? When leadership positions are basically passed down from one family member to the next, like a family heirloom. And this is a direct fallout of that first problem we talked about. Since there are no real internal elections or open processes, it becomes super easy for a top leader to just give positions to their family and friends. This keeps all the power locked within a tiny circle. I mean, think about how unfair that is to a regular, hard-working party member who might be way more qualified. And it's really, really bad for democracy itself, because you end up with people in power who might have zero experience and no real support from the public. Now, here's something to think about, a really important question. Do you think this whole dynastic thing, this tendency to keep power in the family, could be a reason why we don't see enough women getting tickets to fight elections? Is there a connection there? It's a serious point to consider for sure. Okay, moving on to challenge number 3. And this one is a bit of a monster. Money and muscle power. Let's be real, elections are incredibly expensive these days. Winning an election costs a fortune. And when that's the reality, parties start looking for, well, shortcuts. This cartoon just says it all, doesn't it? The main goal for any party is to win, right? So they start looking for candidates who can bring in the big bucks. People who can either pay for their own campaign or raise a ton of money. This sometimes means they'll even support candidates who have a criminal background, just because they think that person can win. And what's the result? Wealthy individuals and big corporations get way too much say in how our country is run. It creates a really unfair system. And all of this brings us to the fourth and final challenge. This is one that affects you and me, every single voter. It's that feeling you get sometimes when you look at the ballot paper and think, do I really have a meaningful choice here? So why do we feel like that? Well, a couple of things are going on. First, the big ideas, the ideologies that used to separate parties, they've started to blur. Especially on big economic issues, a lot of the major parties sound almost the same. They might argue about the tiny details, but the core policies are often quite similar. And then you have the same leaders hopping from one party to the next. So if you're a voter who wants to choose based on clear principles, it gets really confusing. It feels like you're just picking between different versions of the same thing. Okay, so we've talked about 4 pretty big problems. And yeah, it can sound a bit depressing, but don't worry, it's not all bad news. Now we get to the most important part. What can we do about it? How do we fix this? What's the path to making things better? You know, people have been trying to clean up politics for a while now. Some really important steps have already been taken. For example, our Constitution was changed to bring in something called the anti-defection law to stop politicians from party hopping. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, hey, every candidate now has to submit a legal document, we call it an affidavit, and tell everyone exactly how much property they have and if they have any criminal cases. Even the Election Commission has been pushing parties to have their own internal elections. But while these are all good steps, they haven't exactly solved everything overnight. All right, let's quickly break down that term defection. It's a really important one for your exams. All it means is when an MLA or an MP, after winning an election on one party's ticket, decides to just switch to another party. Usually this happens for some personal gain, like money or a minister's post. The anti-defection law was created to put a stop to this exact practice. And that other term, affidavit, it's simpler than it sounds. It's basically a legal promise. It's a signed document where a person swears that all the personal information they're giving about their money, their property, any criminal cases is 100% true. The whole point was to give us, the voters, a clearer picture of who we're voting for. So, besides what's already been done, there are a few other big ideas for reform that are always being talked about. First, some people say we need a new law that forces parties to be democratic on the inside. Another huge suggestion is to make it a rule that parties must give at least 1/3 of their tickets to women candidates. And then there's the idea of state funding for elections, where the government gives parties money to run their campaigns. This could cut down on their need for huge donations from big companies and, reduce the influence of black money. But look, laws and rules are one thing. They can only do so much. At the end of the day, do you know who has the real power to change things? The most powerful tool for reform? It's us. It's ordinary people. It's you. So how do we do it? Well, there are two main ways we can bring about change. The first is putting pressure from the outside. Things like signing petitions, using social media, holding peaceful protests. The media plays a huge role here. But then there's the second way, which is maybe even more powerful, and that is to change things from the inside. This means good, honest people, young people, not just standing on the sidelines and complaining, but actually joining politics to fix the system from within. And that brings us to this final, really powerful thought. I want you to remember this. The problem of bad politics can be solved by more and better politics. Giving up on politics because it seems messy or broken isn't the answer. No way. The real solution is to get more involved, to demand better, and to be the better politics our country needs. And that, my friends, is a challenge for every single one of us.